it was Creatures of the Night, it was almost totally dark. It was one of those things. She said that one very bright day she stepped into the exhibit and, of course, was instantly plunged into total darkness from sunlight into that room. Almost immediately, she said, a small hand grabbed mine. Smiling, she asked, "And who do you belong to?" And this little boy said, "I'm yours till the lights come on." Imagine that. That's a pretty good thought. There are times and seasons of life where it can be a little dark, and we have to hold on until the light starts shining through again, and then keep holding on nonetheless. But I want us to think about tonight that it's prayer time, and looking at a few verses in Luke 22, starting in verse 39. This is the prayer that Jesus would offer in the garden right before he would be betrayed and ultimately crucified on that cross. So listen to what takes place. Starting in verse 39, again, Luke 22, it says, "Coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives as he was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, 'Pray that you may not enter into temptation.' And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, 'Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done.' Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. When he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Then he said to them, 'Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation.'" Now, several thoughts come to mind as I was looking through these verses. And so this is going to seem like a lot. I feel like I'm giving you a Charles Stanley outline where I've got a point, 3 subpoints, and several other points, okay, that's going to go with it. So you just bear with me. But we're going to go through it pretty quick. But the first one is the longest one because of the subpoints. And the first one is to develop good habits. And the first one is this: it is wise to follow Jesus. He says, coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives. He was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. They joined or accompanied him. And we know follow is a little more in depth even than that. We join him in his mission and his purpose and all that he's about. We accompany him in that. And they don't fully realize the season of the time they were in specifically at that moment. Oftentimes we don't either. We don't fully know the extent of the particular moment, the urgency even of the time and the moment. But they followed him. And so he goes to this particular place in the Mount of Olives. It tells us he's accustomed to going there. It's a normal spot for them. Matter of fact, over in the Gospel of John 18, as it's relaying their part of this story, it talks about this place, and it says that Judas knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. And so understand that. Jesus is going to a common place where basically anybody that knew him knew where to find him. He didn't hide. He wasn't running away knowing what was about to happen. He goes there. And he gathers in this particular moment. This was a special place for him. Maybe you've got a special place like that. Maybe it's at home, maybe it's the backyard, maybe it's in the woods, whatever it might be. But a special place to gather. But it's wise to follow Jesus. And so they make their way there. They all knew this was the place. And ultimately, of course, Judas would lead them to find Jesus there. Again, he went basically in plain sight. It made me think, of course, about Daniel over in chapter 6 when the decree has been signed and everything's taken care of about going to the lion's den. And Daniel didn't go and hide, did he? No, he went home, windows open, everything is normal, and he bows down and prays and gives thanks. And to be honest, part of me wonders if he wasn't even a little louder than normal. on that particular day because of his faith and trust in the Lord. And so Jesus gives us a picture of that as well here. So it's wise to follow Jesus. It's also wise to obey Jesus. It tells us in the next verse, when he came to the place, again, specific, he says to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. Now, we're going to come back to that at the end because he says it again at the end, but it's wise to obey him. And what is he telling them to do? Well, to pray. And the same form of the word pray is used in each instance you see the word in this passage. If you remember, a couple of Sundays ago, we talked about prayer when Paul was talking to the church at Philippi, and he used 4 different words. Well, this is a version of the same word that's here, which is earnest and has to do with worship when we talk to the Lord. And so it's wise to obey Jesus in this sense. And so he tells them to pray, to worship, to come before him so that they don't arise or end up coming and going into temptations and trials and provings and all those sort of things which are going to come. That's important. He's about to go to the cross, and he's telling them to pay attention so you do not enter into temptation. He's about to die, but he's concerned for them. And so, again, it's wise to obey Jesus. And then the next couple of verses here, under the thought of developing good habits, is it's wise to pray like Jesus. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. And you can interpret that how you want, depends on how you throw, right? Depends on how you throw is a stone's throw. Some of us can throw it to the Family Life Center. Some of us might hit the first pew. It just depends. So it wasn't very far away, but it's determined like that. He kneels down, and knelt can also mean he might have even laid down, and he prayed. And he said, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. It's wise for us to pray like Jesus. Now, withdrawn is a word that we look at and we probably pass over. It's something we think, well, he just separates himself from them, and that's true, and that's part of the visual it's trying to give, but the word is much more intense than that. Withdrawn has the idea he tears himself away from them. This is a painful moment in many ways. And not only that, it has the idea of drawing the sword or unsheathing the sword out of the pocket. And so he withdraws away. 2 thoughts. This is a difficult move because Jesus is the only one that knows what's about to happen. So he pulls himself away to pray a prayer like this. And not only that, he realizes he's going to battle. Hence, he's drawing the sword. This is intense moment, which we'll come to here in just a minute. This is strong. And he prays to his Father about his will, knowing the cup, which represents judgment so often we think of in the Old Testament, or God's wrath as we think of what he's going to take upon himself. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, it's not my will, it's yours. That'll be done. Warren Wiersbe says, as he faced the sufferings that lay ahead, especially being made a sacrifice for sin, his holy soul was troubled to the depths. He did not pray in order to discover the Father's will or try to change it, but be surrendered to it. Again, not my will, but thine be done. And so it's wise to pray like Jesus. I read a neat story about a missionary by the name of William Chalmers. He was a missionary in Africa. He was approached one day by 2 tribal chieftains. And for more than a year, they had been hearing about Chalmers and his God and the changes that had happened in some other villages around them. So they've heard the stories, and so they wanted to come and see him. These other villages had welcomed him and the message, and it had changed them, and so these 2 wanted to see what it was about. So the story goes, impressed by it all, they had come to invite him to their villages. Sadly, Mr. Chalmers told them that because of commitments he had already made, that he'd be unable to go back with them to their villages right then, that didn't know when he'd be able to get there. Well, they asked for any other Christian teacher that he could send, and once again, he had to tell them, I don't have anybody else to send. I don't know of anybody else I can send with you. And so as a result, the two remained there for about 2 weeks. They observed his life and what was going on and what was taking place in this village that was now predominantly Christian because of his influence there. They were particularly curious about the custom of daily praying to God, not as a God to be feared and whose anger had to be appeased, but as a God to be loved and thanked for his protection, for providing what is needed and for his guidance. And so eventually they went back home. They had urged Chalmers, just come as soon as you can. Well, guess what? As soon as you can ended up being. It was about 2 years. Again, this life is hard, to say the least, trying to do A to B and all of that. So nearly 2 years passed, and he arranges to go. He gets up early, ends up arriving very early in the morning. And when he gets there, he finds villagers on their knees in complete silence. Imagine, use your sanctified imagination. They're all on their knees in silence, not making a sound. So he asked the chief what they were doing, and the chief said, we're praying to your God. Your God. Mr. Chalmers said, but you're not saying anything. Nobody's saying anything. The chief said, we don't know what to say, but for nearly 2 years we have met here praying and waiting for someone to come and teach us what to say. Can you imagine that? Well, we know what to say in many respects, and even when we don't, the Spirit intercedes for us in those moments. But it's wise to pray like Jesus. All right. Just so you know, page two of my notes is a lot shorter than page 1. So we're going to roll through. Second thing is prayer yields strength. Look at verse 43. Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. So he cries out to the Father. The Father knows this task is going to be virtually unthinkable, unbearable, so to speak, from what he's about to go through. And so an angel appears, a messenger from God, from heaven to strengthen him. The word strengthen means invigorates him. Just builds him up almost beyond measure, because prayer can yield strength for us in very remarkable ways. Hence, we've been seeing in Philippians the importance of praying right to the Lord. And so our Savior does that, and he is strengthened through that. But then 3, prayer is intense spiritual warfare. It says, being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. That's the only time this word agony is translated, is used in the New Testament. It has the idea of anguish, dealing with wrestling, struggling. And Jesus is doing that. It shows that the human side of him in particular. If you think about the cross and what you've seen in your life from his standpoint, and you know that's about to come, it doesn't matter, in a sense, who you are. This is grueling. If you know you're about to deal with that and more, and take the sin of the world upon your shoulders, this is grueling. And so he is in agony. He doesn't go away from prayer. He prays more earnestly, with greater worship, with greater intention about him. He spends even more time with it, to the point, it says, sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. These large, thick, the idea of the word is that he's pouring forth from his face, and it's like clots that are falling and hitting the ground. If it was silent enough, you could probably hear them hit the ground. You ever hear raindrops when they fall? It's a similar picture when you think of the drops of blood that would just hit the ground from praying. There is a real, true medical terminology used to describe that. Some for a long time thought, well, that's just impossible. No, it's not. It's not. And Jesus experienced it. And so prayer is intense spiritual warfare. Verse 45 reminds us to keep praying. It says, when he rose up from prayer, come to his disciples, remember, just a stone throw away, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Now, sorrow has to do with heaviness and pain and sadness and grief and affliction. All of that's tied to the word sorrow. But they're sleeping from sorrow. Maybe they don't really know what to feel. They just know he's feeling something really heavy. And so the sorrow is there, and that takes a toll. It can wear you out, and they become sleepy, and ultimately they fall asleep. We don't know how long that was. It could have been moments. It could have been several minutes. It might have been an hour or more. We don't necessarily know at this point, but they're tired. And there's a lot on them, although they don't understand the same thing he does about what's happening. And so they prayed, but they eventually succumbed to the weariness and fell asleep. Y'all ever fell asleep praying? You can confess, it's Wednesday night church. Most likely you have. At some point, sometime, you've fallen asleep praying. It happens. Normally, it's because there's something heavy on us. And we just want to give it to God and do the best we can. And in the moments, and it's really a beautiful thought, he gives us rest, sleep, even in that. I think it's pretty amazing. I read a story about a little girl. She's kind of heartbroken, the story went, but she knelt and began to just pour out her heart to God there at the church altar. And she didn't really know what to say. And so she was sobbing, and she remembered her daddy told her, God knows your needs even before you pray. He can answer when you don't know what to ask. And so this is just a little girl. And she remembered that, and her heart was just heavy. And so she started praying the alphabet. Started praying the alphabet. And there was a lady that heard her. Little girl's just crying. I mean, she's sobbing. And she come over beside her and was listening to her say the ABCs. Trying to figure out, what are you doing? What are you trying to do? And the little girl says, I'm praying to God from my heart. And the lady said, well, it sounds to me more like you're just saying the alphabet. And the little girl's like, yes, but God knows more about what I need than I do. And he can take all those letters and arrange them in just the right way to hear and answer my prayers. Some of you are going to go home and pray the alphabet, aren't you? That's okay. The main thing is keep praying. Keep praying. And then, last, I told you we'd go through these other parts pretty quick. Prayer helps us resist temptation. He says to them, after finding them asleep, why do you sleep? Remember, others talk about, can't you pray for an hour? Can't you at least pray for a little? Why do you sleep? Rise and pray. Interesting thought of get up even. Rise and pray. Is that physically stand? It could be. Or maybe it's mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Rise and pray. Lest you enter into temptation. Now remember, Peter has said, I'll die for you. And he fell asleep. And so this is the moments, the Lord's using all of this to help them come to a much stronger faith than what they realized. But I think it's just amazing to me that Jesus tells them twice, moments before he is betrayed, arrested, all those trials, crucifixion, he tells them, pray that you enter not into temptation. He's concerned for them. He's concerned for their soul and their spirit and what they're about to endure, although we know he's about to endure far greater than anyone would ever endure on the cross. They were resting physically, but what they needed more, rise and pray, is spiritual strength. And God, oftentimes in the midst of us rising, whether that's necessarily standing or not, or just coming to attention, whatever you might want to use of that, is He gives us rest even in the midst of those times and those moments. Billy Graham once wrote, "I watched the deckhands on the great liner U.S. as they docked that ship in New York Harbor. First they threw out a rope to the men on the dock, and then inside the boat the great motors went to work and pulled on the great cable. But oddly enough, the pier wasn't pulled out to the ship, but the ship was pulled snugly up to the pier." Billy Graham said, prayer is the rope that pulls God and us together, but it doesn't pull God down to us. It pulls us up to God. We must learn to say with Christ, the master of the art of praying, "Not my will, but thine be done." And I'm reminded God's still God, even in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's still God. Y'all agree with that? Even in Gethsemane, He's still God. And so it's praying time. I remember years ago I heard Ken Whitten, he now serves with our North American Mission Board. I remember he used to pastor somewhere in Florida. Can't remember the church now. One of the churches there, and I may have told y'all this before, they would get excited about when it was time to take up the offering. And they just made it a big deal. It was a fun thing for them back when you passed plates, years ago. Don't do that much anymore. But it was time for that, and someone would get up, inevitably, sometimes him, sometimes someone else, and they would say, "It's offering time. It's offering time." And they'd just explode because they realized how good God had been and counting blessings and all that sort of stuff. Well, it's praying time. It's praying time. And so I want us to be excited about the opportunity we're going to have in a few moments to pray and to seek God's face and to ask Him to intercede in our lives as we worship Him through our prayer. Let me lead us in prayer tonight. Father, thank you for these few moments we have to look at your word. Lord, the thought of Jesus in such a dark moment is pretty staggering for us tonight. And Lord, He knew what was coming, and yet His heart was still so concerned for His disciples. He knew the cross awaited. But yet His heart went out, not just or simply for Himself, but for those that He knew were going to have to stand in a really difficult spot and have to carry the torch of the gospel to the world. And so, Lord, thank you for those who pray like Jesus. Help us to develop those sort of habits where we are accustomed to prayer, where our families and friends even know there's times and places where we're going to be and what we're going to be doing as we talk to you. And then, Lord, you work in ways and intercede, and we know it certainly wasn't your will. It wasn't why Jesus came, to not go to the cross. But it was the purpose and intent that we could have a relationship with you all these years later. And so, God, thank you for that. And so in just a moment, we'll go through our prayer list and think of some folks that really need it, that we can think and pray about tonight. And then we're going to pray for those and one another and whatever you put upon our hearts and minds. And so, God, I just want to thank you that it's praying time. And I pray as we seek your face that you'll reveal yourself in all of your glory to us, not accordance to our will, but that your will would be done. In Jesus' name, amen.